So hopefully this is video number 2 that I'm going to look back at the first workshop that we did, session 1, and talk about some of the highlights of what we were looking at. Now in that workshop we were examining this third state of awareness that is available to us. Now ordinarily we think that there are two states of awareness. We are either awake or we are sleeping / dreaming. But really, that's kind of a misnomer. If you're really paying attention to your waking consciousness, you'll find that you slip in and out of this attention to the now in many different ways, because sometimes you can flip back into a memory. Sometimes you can be thinking ahead about something you're planning. You can be reacting on the basis of what you're feeling from somebody else. And that then sparks another feeling that you might have recovered from the past. You can be daydreaming. You could be in a creative state of flow. Each of these is quite different from what we normally think of focused attention in the waking state. So we have a variety of different states of awareness that we go through in any given day. But just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to talk about the waking state as if it's a whole, which it is not. But the waking state, and distinguish that, of course, from the sleep state in which dreaming happens. And I'm suggesting to you that there's a third state that can be really valuable for accessing the dream state. And this is what I call the twilight awareness. The twilight awareness is something that hopefully we can practice when we go to bed each night, and also practice before we get out of bed in the morning and start our day. There's this in-between space that has basically three components to it. One of them is the affirmation, and I suggested to you that it would be really valuable for you to craft an affirmation that works for you, that will help your subconscious to understand that this is pretty important business that we're about. And it also helps to prime it in the direction that you want it to go. So for instance, you might have an affirmation that says something like, I dream very completely and I can remember my dreams in great detail, and something like that, that just helps your subconscious to know that now it's on notice. You're going to take the dream world seriously enough to want to work with it so that it's going to then influence your waking consciousness. That's really what we're trying to do here, is to form some kind of a link between the sleeping, dreaming, and the waking consciousness. And that link is the twilight awareness. So that's the first thing that we're looking at, is crafting that affirmation in your own language and according to your own needs. Very, very powerful stuff. And so I would suggest that when you go into this in-between state, which is the twilight awareness, that might be the first thing that you do. The second component of the twilight awareness is one of deep relaxation. Now you remember, I said you may remember that when we did the first workshop, in order to get you accustomed or at least introduced to that state of deep relaxation, I played for you a Monroe Institute recording which led you through a 10-point system of relaxation. And I suggested that there again, you can use any relaxation that works for you. You certainly do not have to use the Monroe recording. In fact, I don't think you can even get it, to be honest with you. I think that was just something we used when we were going around, at least I used when I was going around the country talking about this stuff to different groups. But a good way to do that, that I found to be very effective, is to actually pretend that you are slowly dipping yourself into a warm bath, and your feet go in first, and you feel that relaxation, and I suggested to you that you would want to imagine space between the cells and molecules of your feet, so that there's this sense of moving into spaciousness for your feet. You slide down a little bit further, and you get your knees on down in. You go a little bit further, and you've got your waist in a little bit further, and you got your torso, so that you're just working up through your body And at each point, you're allowing yourself or suggesting to yourself that there is space, imagining space between the cells and the molecules of that particular region of the body. And then, of course, when you get up to here, you might imagine, so you don't get a sense of drowning, because nobody really wants to drown. Um, you can then imagine going into the tub and letting the water kind of come around here. Your nose and mouth are still out. And then finally, you might imagine a warm cloth going over your face. However you do it, I'm sure many of you have run into different relaxation exercises. However you do it, it's just great. Whatever works for you is the main thing. And the main point here is that we're trying to do is to get relaxed. Now, why is relaxation so important? Well, the narrative self, in other words, this self that thinks that I am this person that lives inside of this body, creates different stories about its experience. And so that's why I call it the narrative self, because it's always spinning stories. And these stories have an effect on the body. So that when we are in the story, we'll notice that we have certain body sensations. And even more importantly, we have body tension. And so it's this tension in many ways that keeps us locked into this narrative sense of self, when in fact we have a much greater accessibility to other ranges of self. And that's a lot, in many ways, that's a lot of what we're talking about in this course, is how to get beyond the confines of the narrative self. So that's number one. When we relax, we start to move beyond the confines of this narrative self and the tension that keeps it in place. But also, when we are relaxing, we are opening ourselves up to new ranges of experience. And particularly in this case, what we're trying to do is to lay the groundwork for the dream state. So that's the second thing that we're doing, is that first the affirmation and then the relaxation. And then when we're moving into this twilight awareness, what we're also wanting to do is to do it within the context of the heart. Again, you may remember from the first workshop, what we did to facilitate that was to simply do what I was calling at that time breathing and yet not breathing. It's a very gentle way of taking in, we're not really focusing on air going through the nostrils and into the lungs, but we're taking in a sort of presence, sort of energy. One person at our workshop last Saturday, called it, could that be prana? Of course it could be. The words don't really matter. It's really more the experience of it. So what I would suggest to you is that you would practice this very gentle, ethereal, soft, careful, peaceful way of breathing, taking in whatever it is you want to call it, whether it's energy or prana or attention or love. You're moving it, you're taking it in, and you're actually breathing it into this heart center right here. Get up here a little bit. So that for me, what happens when I do that is that there's a sense of warmth that starts to develop. In my mind's eye, it seems as if there's light that starts to be connected with this warmth. Sometimes it can feel like the heart is stretching a bit. So it's a different sensation. So whatever that sensation is for you, it's very important that you begin to understand what those markers are for you. So what we did in that exercise was to Start with the heart and start to sense that place there that is an energy center. We're not talking about the physical heart, it's an energy center. And then what we did was to expand that out in our mind's eye so that now the energy center is as big as the rib cage. And then we expanded it from there so that now this energy center was as large as the body and it was encompassing the body. And then we went from there to encompassing the group. We then, now remember that at this point you are inside, you, the essence of you, is inside of this energy center. I mean, inside of this energy bubble that is the heart. So when it was enclosing the whole group, you were in that group and you were inside that enclosure. Then the next thing we did was to move it back, kind of shrink it, pull it back in, so that now we were back to the place where it was as large as the physical body. And from there, then we pulled it back in again, remembering that we are still inside of this energy ball. And as we're moving it back into the rib cage, now we are still inside of that. And then we moved it back to the size of a melon, and we are still inside of that. And I think it would be good to even shrink it down even further, though we didn't do it in the exercise. Shrink it down so maybe it's the size of a baseball or something like that. This is the place from which we're going to practice the Twilight awareness, inside of this place that is the heart center. Now, for me, this is a very sacred place. And I'm convinced that when you look at certain esoteric literature, it's often been called the Holy of Holies. In the Jewish tradition, there was the Holy of Holies that was supposedly located in the temple that only the priests could go into. But I think that was what was presented to the public. And when you got on the inner circles, you began to realize that the temple is actually the body. And inside of this body is the Holy of Holies, which is this heart center. And it's from this very sacred place that we're going to be doing our work. Now, when we are doing this, we're actually crafting the Twilight awareness. Now, the Twilight awareness, and I have some attachments, hopefully, that we'll be able to send along with this. And this would be attachment 1, where you'll see a drawing where you've got waking consciousness on one side and sleep and dreaming consciousness on the other side, and in between them is this twilight area, both as we're moving into sleep and also out of sleep into waking consciousness. We're crafting this twilight awareness, so that this space now becomes a place where we are preparing the dream time. When we go to bed at night, before we fall asleep, we're going to do those 3 things. We're going to do the affirmation, we're going to do the relaxation, and then we're going to move into the heart center intentionally. So that now we are forming a link between waking consciousness and sleep. Why the heart? Because the heart specializes in relationships. Unlike the mind, which is always looking to slice and dice, sees everything in isolation, it's the heart that really understands relationships. So there's a relationship that we're building between waking consciousness and sleep. And then when we get out of bed in the morning, before we get out of bed in the morning, we're going to go back into this twilight awareness, and we're going to call up the dream into that space and begin to interact with the dream so that it can then become a living essence that can then bridge into our waking consciousness. Okay, I think that's probably long enough. I'm going to stop this now and be back with what will be the third